Hey guys, I'm going to be talking to you about the civil rights movement and major events that were part of it. And the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s was an activist movement in the United States to end discrimination against African Americans and enforce their rights. And the power of music is what brought people together for this cause. One of the first key events was the Brown versus Board decision. This took place in 1954, and the decision stated that state-sanctioned segregation of public schools was a violation of the 14th Amendment and was therefore unconstitutional. This ended in backlash, and Little Rock 9 was a prime example. That was basically when African American students tried attending a high school, and there was a lot of resistance, which ended in federal troops having to get involved. The bus boycott of 1955 followed Rosa Parks' incident where she refused to give up her seat on a bus and got arrested. This boycott lasted 381 days and was a success. In 1960, colored citizens started sit-ins, which was basically when they sat in restaurants and demanded to be served, and this became a widespread activity. It ended up desegregating hundreds of places, and the SNCC was created as a result. Martin Luther King Jr. was thrown in jail for being in a nonviolent protest, and because of this, he published letters from a Birmingham jail, and he basically talked about how unfair and unjust the system was, and he was just really unhappy with it. And Lyndon Johnson heard about this and passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which outlawed segregation in public places. The summer of 1964 was also known as Freedom Summer, where citizens were fighting for their voting rights. Groups like the SCLC, NAACP, SNCC, and CORE started huge voting registrations, and it was a failure because of all the killings that took place. And 3 people actually went missing and were found dead 2 months later. So, since it was such a failed attempt, MLK led a march from Selma to Montgomery, and the Voting Rights Act was passed because of this. After MLK's assassination in 1968, the civil rights movement started to fade, but it will never be forgotten because it changed America in a political, social, and educational way. The civil rights movement wouldn't be as powerful if it wasn't for music of the era, and songs brought everyone together for the cause, which was to gain equality for African American citizens. Strange Fruit by Billie Holiday talked about violence before and during the civil rights movement, and her lyrics did not sugarcoat the killings and racial resistance that took place. People Get Ready by Curtis Mayfield had a more optimistic approach, and it was pretty positive, and this was all because of MLK, and he was making huge contributions to the civil rights movement at the time, which gave people hope. The same goes with Change Is Gonna Come by Sam Cooke. It was also influenced a lot by MLK and his actions, and the song also describes the struggle and hope during the movement. We Shall Overcome by Pete Seeger is probably the most important of all the songs that I've listed, and this is because it was the unofficial civil rights movement anthem. It was a folk song for slaves that got popularized during this whole movement, and it speaks of all the goals that they were trying to achieve. The civil rights movement and the songs of the era bled to new generations, and it was later seen in the 80s and 90s with the new genre of hip-hop and rap. One of the most iconic songs of this time period was F the Police by the NWA, and basically during this time racism was still prominent in cities, and protesters involved in conflicts with the police were pretty aggravated, so they channeled their anger through songs like this, and controversies caused an uproar. The next song is Trapped by Tupac, and he basically talks about black rights that were restricted as he faced issues with the enforcement and he had to struggle, and a lot of it was shown in his lyrics. We the People by A Tribe Called Quest addressed irrational comments that they've heard, and they decided to put a lot of the things that they heard in a song, and they were just mocking people and how they said it. So yeah, that's about it, and thank you for listening.